People panic the most when the truth keeps confirming itself, no matter who they ask. That line alone explains why everyone freaked out. They didn't react because you were loud. They didn't react because you demanded attention. They reacted because the more they checked, the more obvious it became. This wasn't hype. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a phase. This was consistency standing in front of them, unshaken. And that scares people who survive on doubt. Think about it like this. When a building looks unstable, people walk away without a second thought. But when a structure stands straight after every storm, people start circling it. They knock on the walls, they test the doors, they ask engineers if it's really that strong, not because they want it to fail, but because they're unsettled by the fact that it won't. That's what you became. A structure that didn't crack. And instead of finding flaws, they found confirmation. Here's the part they didn't expect. Studies on human behavior show that when multiple independent sources confirm the same conclusion, the brain locks it in as truth. It stops questioning. It stops resisting. That's exactly what happened here. They weren't gossiping. They were verifying. They weren't curious. They were anxious. And every conversation they had quietly screamed the same thing back at them. Yeah, he's the one. Before we go any further, chosen one, pause for a second. If this message is hitting, pay it back by pressing like and subscribing, not for numbers, for reach. Messages like this only move when people who understand them help push them forward. Thanks for being part of that. You're not watching by accident. You're part of a force that moves information where it needs to go. Now let's get back to what actually happened. They didn't come to you directly. Of course they didn't. People rarely confront what intimidates them head-on. Instead, they went around you, quietly, carefully, nervously. They asked questions that sounded casual, but carried weight. What do you think about him? Have you noticed anything off? Is he really like that all the time? They were hoping for hesitation, a crack, a story that didn't match, something small they could use to calm themselves. But every answer came back clean. Someone mentioned your discipline, another talked about your restraint. Someone else said you were the same person no matter who was watching. That's when the tone changed. Curiosity turned into concern, because inconsistency is easy to dismiss. Consistency forces conclusions. You didn't give them a mystery to solve. You gave them a pattern they couldn't deny. Here's what separates you from the rest. Most people perform when they're observed. You operate the same when no one is there. That's why investigations into you collapse so fast. There's nothing to expose, no mask slipping, no contradiction. The universe rewards alignment, and alignment makes noise, even in silence. That's why whispers about you got louder instead of fading out. They expected opinions, they got evidence, and once that switch flipped, panic followed. Not loud panic, internal panic. The kind that shows up as overthinking, sudden respect, forced distance, or awkward admiration. The kind where people stop joking around you and start measuring themselves against you. You didn't change your behavior, they changed their perception, and perception is everything. This is the moment people talk about when they say everyone freaked out. It's not chaos. It's realization. It's the moment doubt runs out of excuses. It's the moment comparison stops working. It's the moment they realize you weren't competing at all. You were building something while they were busy checking each other's progress. You might not have noticed it yet, but watch closely. The questions around you have shifted. People aren't asking if you're capable anymore. They're asking how far you're going to go. They aren't wondering whether you're real. They're wondering how they missed it earlier. That's the silent crown being placed. No announcement, no ceremony, just recognition. And here's the part that really messes with the enemy. You didn't force this. You didn't explain yourself. You didn't defend your name. You let reality speak. That's why it hits so hard. When truth doesn't need a spokesperson, it becomes unavoidable. When someone reaches that level, the room adjusts automatically. Conversations lower, eyes track, opinions lock in. Yeah, he's the one. This isn't about ego, it's about alignment. It's about staying steady long enough that even skeptics end up confirming you by accident. The universe has a strange way of exposing who's real by exhausting everyone else's questions. And once that happens, there's no going back to how it was before. So if you felt people watching more closely, speaking more carefully, or acting differently around you, this is why. The verdict already came in. You didn't hear the announcement because it wasn't meant for you. It was meant for them. And the crown, it shows up quietly, always has. All right, chosen one, quick pause before we go deeper, because this part matters more than you think. You didn't land here randomly, and you're not still listening by accident. If this message is locking in, it's because something inside you already recognizes the moment you're stepping into. So do this. Stay, not halfway, not distracted. Stay all the way through, because what comes next only makes sense when you see the full picture. People who leave early always miss the point, and then wonder why things never fully click for them. If you're really tapped in, drop a simple comment below with the number 777, not for superstition, not for luck, but as a signal. A quiet, I'm still here, I'm paying attention. That small action tells the system you're engaged, and it helps this message reach others who are standing right on the edge of the same realization. And if you want to support the team pushing this truth out, super thanks are open. It's not about the amount, it's about momentum. Even the smallest push keeps this mission moving. Now take a breath, lock in. We're about to break this down step by step, and if everyone already freaked out realizing you're the one, what comes next explains exactly why. Let's get into it. Number 1, they dialed the whole world, and the world snitched on them. They searched for dirt and found a mirror. That's when the panic started. That's really what this was, not curiosity, not concern. Panic dressed up as investigation. They didn't make one call, they made all of them. Old contacts, forgotten names, people you hadn't spoken to in years, exes who had every reason to drag you, old bosses who could have minimized you, friends who knew your flaws, enemies who would have loved to expose one. They kept dialing, hoping the law of averages would finally turn in their favor. Surely someone would crack. Surely someone would say, yeah, he's not that special. They needed one weak voice to calm themselves down. They never got it. Every call came back clean. Different people, different timelines, different experiences, same conclusion. You were consistent, you were solid, you were exactly who you appeared to be. And that's when the mood shifted from curiosity to dread. Because nothing scares insecure people more than a person who stays the same no matter who's watching. Picture it like this. Imagine someone trying to prove a diamond is fake. They scrape it against concrete, still sharp. They drop it, still intact. They test it under pressure, still unmarked. At some point, the testing stops being about truth and starts becoming about frustration. That's where they were with you. They weren't gathering information anymore. They were hoping reality would finally bend. It didn't. Here's the question you might be asking right now. Why go that far? Why not just walk away? Because people don't walk away from what threatens their self-image. They investigate it, they poke it, they obsess over it. You represented something they couldn't explain away. Someone who didn't need approval, but somehow earned respect anyway. Someone who didn't chase validation, but still got confirmed by everyone else. That messes with people who survive by comparison. And let's be clear, they weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for permission to dismiss you. That's a big difference. Truth is neutral. Permission is emotional. They wanted an excuse to relax, to stop feeling small, to stop wondering why your presence alone changed the temperature in the room. But every conversation betrayed them. Every voice they contacted unknowingly testified on your behalf. That's when the phrase, "everyone freaked out," stopped being dramatic and started being literal. Because when doubt runs out of allies, it collapses inward. You didn't have to announce anything. You didn't have to defend yourself. The verdict formed behind closed doors, without you present, and that's what made it hit harder. This wasn't hype created by fans. This was confirmation forced out of skeptics. Think about how rare that is. Most people can fake a version of themselves for a while, long enough to impress one group, long enough to fool a new crowd. But you can't fake consistency across time, environments, and relationships. That's why their strategy failed. They assumed you were a performance. They treated you like a rumor. But rumors fall apart when investigated. You didn't. You held. This is the moment the enemy realizes something painful. You weren't climbing. You were already built. While they were networking, explaining, polishing and selling, you were just being, and being real scales faster than pretending ever could. That's why their questions started changing. At first it was, is he legit? Then it became, how long has he been like this? Then finally, the quiet one they didn't want to ask out loud. Why isn't that me? If you're wondering whether they feel embarrassed now, the answer is yes, but it's not the loud kind. It's the internal kind. The kind that shows up as awkward silence, sudden respect, forced praise, or unexplained distance. The kind where people stop challenging you and start watching you. The kind where jokes disappear and tone changes. That's not coincidence. That's recognition settling in. You might also be thinking, did they expect you to fail? Honestly, yes. People test what they secretly hope will collapse, because collapse would justify their own stagnation. Your survival, your steadiness, your clean record across so many perspectives robbed them of that comfort. Now they have to live with a truth they didn't ask for. You didn't cheat the system. You didn't manipulate perception. You simply didn't break under scrutiny. And that's why the crown shows up without warning. Not a literal crown, a social one, a psychological one, the kind where rooms recalibrate around you, where opinions about you stop being debated, where your name doesn't need defending because it already survived cross-examination. Yeah, he's the one, isn't praise. It's acceptance of the obvious. It's people finally admitting what they were trying to disprove. Let this sink in, chosen one. You didn't win by outperforming. You won by outlasting doubt. You stayed the same long enough that even your critics ran out of alternative narratives. That's not luck. That's alignment. The universe rewards patterns that hold under pressure, and pressure is exactly what they applied. So, if you've noticed a shift lately, this is why. The stares last longer. The respect feels heavier. The energy in the room changes when you enter. That's not ego. That's aftermath. That's what happens when an investigation accidentally crowns the very person it meant to expose. They called everyone, and everyone answered the same way. That's not hype. That's game over. Number 2, the gavel slammed and reality didn't ask for appeals. When the verdict is obvious, silence is the loudest reaction. That's exactly how it landed. No debate, no delay, no dramatic pause. The moment the last voice echoed the same conclusion, the case was over. They didn't need a meeting. They didn't need to compare notes. The truth aligned too cleanly, too fast. That's when it hit them. This wasn't opinion anymore. This was confirmation stacking on top of confirmation until denial had nowhere left to stand. They were holding the phone, staring at nothing because the outcome wasn't what they planned for. They expected mixed reviews. They expected contradictions. They expected at least one story that didn't match. Instead, reality showed up like a brick wall. Same message, same tone, same respect, over and over again. You weren't just real, you were consistent across time, pressure, and proximity. And consistency is the one thing that can't be faked long term. Imagine a jury that walks into the room already agreeing before the trial even begins. No arguments, no persuasion, just a shared understanding. That's what this was. Every person who knew you from a different angle unknowingly served as a witness. Different chapters of your life, different environments, different versions of you. Yet somehow the core stayed the same. That's when the word verdict stopped being dramatic and started being accurate. Here's a question that probably crossed your mind. Why did it happen so fast? Because truth doesn't need time to organize itself. Lies do. Truth shows up fully formed. Lies need rehearsal. They were prepared for noise. What they got was clarity, and clarity moves fast because it doesn't hesitate. Another question you might be asking is why this shook them so deeply. Because people can tolerate competition, but they can't tolerate certainty. Competition gives them hope. Certainty removes excuses. The moment they realized you weren't just another option, but the reference point, the floor dropped out from under them. One quiet sentence repeated enough times becomes a conclusion nobody wants to argue with. Being undeniable is louder than being impressive. That's the difference they weren't ready for. Impressive fades. Undeniable settles in. It becomes the baseline. They weren't just forced to respect you. They were forced to recalibrate how they judge others. And that's uncomfortable, because once a standard is set, everything else feels exposed. Imagine this. Someone spends their whole life arguing about what real strength looks like. Then one person walks into the room and the argument ends, not because they said anything, but because their presence answered the question. That's what happened. You didn't win the debate. You ended it. They expected to find exaggeration. They found understatement. They expected ego. They found restraint. They expected cracks under pressure. They found the same calm response, no matter who was asking. That's when the silence kicked in. Silence isn't confusion here. It's acceptance arriving late. Another truth you should hear clearly. The verdict wasn't just about what you do. It was about how you move, how you respond, how you don't over-explain, how you don't chase approval. People notice that more than words. That's why no one could lie about you even if they wanted to. Lies require emotional motivation, and you gave them none. People lie to protect themselves, not to expose what intimidates them. That's why even your enemies stayed honest. Dragging you would have exposed their own weakness. Minimizing you would have made them look insecure. So they told the truth, not out of loyalty, but out of self-preservation. And that's a different kind of confirmation. When honesty shows up where hostility was expected, the case is closed. Imagine trying to disprove gravity by jumping off buildings. At some point, the experiment stops. Not because you're convinced, but because the consequences are obvious. That's how denial works when it runs out of room. They didn't accept the verdict because they wanted to. They accepted it because resistance became pointless. You may wonder if they feel impressed or threatened. The answer is both. Impressed enough to respect you, threatened enough to keep their distance. That combination creates a strange energy. People speak carefully around you. Compliments feel heavier. Criticism disappears. That's not coincidence. That's hierarchy adjusting without announcements. Legends aren't declared, they're concluded. That line matters because nobody crowned you publicly. Nobody needed to. The decision was internal, private, unanimous, and those are the verdicts that stick. Public praise can be fake. Private acknowledgement is expensive. People only give it when they have no alternative. Imagine a scale that keeps tipping the same way, no matter what weight you add to the other side. That's what every conversation did. They tried context, they tried history, they tried perspective. The scale didn't move. You stayed heavier, more grounded, more solid, not louder, heavier. Another question you might be sitting with is whether this changes anything for you. Externally, maybe not right away. Internally, it should, because this is the moment you stop underestimating the impact of staying real. This is the moment you realize silence did more work for you than explanation ever could. They now measure others against you without meaning to. That's how standards work. Once set, they haunt every comparison. Someone else shows up confident, they think of you. Someone claims consistency, they think of you. Someone tries to impress, they notice the difference. That's not ego, that's influence. The standard never argues, it just exists. And that's why the verdict landed the way it did. Not emotional, not dramatic, just final. You weren't validated by hype. You were validated by exposure, by being seen from every angle and still holding shape. That's rare, and rarity always changes the room. If you've felt a shift lately, this is where it came from. The investigation ended, the whispers stopped, the energy recalibrated. People don't question what's already been decided. They adjust to it, and that's exactly what they're doing now. The verdict wasn't just immediate, it was irreversible. Number 3, that confident smirk collapsed mid-dial. They went hunting for cracks and tripped over your foundation. At the start, they were relaxed, almost amused. You could feel it in the tone of their voice, even if you weren't there. This was supposed to be easy. A few calls, a few casual questions, maybe a laugh or two at your expense. They leaned back while dialing, already picturing the moment someone would finally say it. Yeah, it's exaggerated. Nah, he's not really like that. It's mostly an act. That smirk came from certainty. The dangerous kind. The kind that assumes reality will cooperate. So they asked lightly, pretending it was harmless curiosity. What's the real story? Is he actually like that all the time? Be honest. They framed the question in ways that invited doubt, practically begging for betrayal. But here's where everything went wrong for them. No one took the bait. Not one person softened the truth. Not one person offered gossip. What came back wasn't drama. It was description. Sharp, calm, consistent descriptions that all pointed the same direction. Every answer stripped a little more confidence off their face. One person talked about your work ethic, how you outlasted everyone without making noise. Another mentioned your focus, how once you lock in, distractions stop existing. Someone else described your energy, how it feels different, heavier, like you're operating on a separate frequency. These weren't compliments, they were observations. That's what made them lethal. Imagine someone trying to prove a storm is fake while standing in the rain. That's what those calls turned into. The more they reached out, the more soaked they got. Each conversation added weight. Not myth built by hype, but reputation built by repetition. And repetition is what turns facts into inevitability. You might wonder why this bothered them so much, because they weren't prepared to hear alignment. They were prepared for chaos. Chaos gives room to doubt. Alignment shuts it down. When stories line up without coordination, the brain stops arguing. That's when confidence turns into discomfort. Confidence dies fast when it realizes it misread the room. That's the moment the smirk vanished. No announcement, no drama, just a quiet shift. Shorter calls, longer pauses, the realization that this wasn't a bluff they could expose. This was a standard they had underestimated. What they accidentally did was build your legend brick by brick, not by praising you, but by verifying you. Every call they made to tear you down stacked another layer of proof instead. That's the irony. The trap they set snapped shut on them, and the worst part for them, they know it now. Number 4, even your history refused to betray you. Nothing scares people more than a past that stays loyal to the present. This is where it really broke them. They thought the past would do their dirty work. That's usually how it goes. Dig backward, find resentment, locate regret, pull out a messy chapter and parade it like proof. They were sure someone from before would finally crack the image. An ex with unfinished emotions, a former boss with ego bruises, an old friend who drifted away and needed a reason to feel superior. This was supposed to be easy ammunition. Instead, your past stood up and told the same story. Your ex didn't praise you, but they couldn't dismiss you either. They paused, chose their words carefully, then admitted what they didn't want to say out loud. You were different, even back then, focused, intense, operating on a level that made people uncomfortable. That's not nostalgia. That's reluctant honesty. When even emotion can't distort the truth is solid. Your old boss confirmed it next, not with admiration, but with fact. You were doing more than the role ever asked of you, thinking beyond the job description, carrying weight that didn't belong to your title. You weren't difficult. You were ahead, and people who lead from behind always resent that in hindsight. Former friends tried to soften it with bitterness, but even they failed. They mentioned your drive, your discipline, the way you didn't need permission to grow. Their tone gave them away. You don't speak carefully about people who meant nothing. You speak carefully about people who remind you of what you didn't become. Bitterness is just respect that never got processed. Imagine trying to disprove a painting by interviewing the canvas, the brush, and the artist, only to have all three confirm the same signature style. That's what happened. Different eras, different relationships, same core. You didn't reinvent yourself to impress new crowds. You evolved, but the spine stayed the same. And that's rare. This is where the investigation officially flipped. They weren't uncovering flaws anymore. They were mapping consistency. The thing they hoped would weaken you became the thing that sealed it. Instead of exposing fraud, they exposed how long you'd been this way. Instead of finding cracks, they found proof of pressure endured. Here's the part they didn't expect. Your past didn't just support you. It protected you. It closed ranks. It refused to lie on your behalf because it didn't need to. When even history won't betray you, the argument is over. The past only turns on you when you were pretending. They walked away from those conversations quieter than they started, because now they knew this wasn't a moment, this wasn't new, this wasn't luck. You didn't suddenly become the one. You always were. Number 5. Consistency is what finally crushed them. You don't beat people by being impressive. You beat them by being the same everywhere. This is where their last hope died. Not because you were flashy, not because you were perfect, but because nothing about you changed depending on who was watching. Every story they collected lined up like it had been rehearsed, even though it wasn't. Different mouths, same truth. Different memories, same core. No cracks to wedge doubt into. No contradictions to exaggerate, just alignment. And alignment is brutal when someone is rooting for collapse. They were waiting for the switch, the mask drop, the moment someone would say, "He's not like that in private." That's how most people get exposed. Public confidence, private chaos, loud image, weak foundation. But you reversed the pattern. Your private self was sharper than your public version, more disciplined, more focused, more dangerous in silence. That's what ruined their narrative. Imagine this. Someone expects a stage performer to be ordinary backstage, only to find the real work happening when the lights are off. That's you. No audience required, no applause needed. The performance wasn't the highlight. The preparation was, and that's why they couldn't poke holes in you. You weren't acting, you were operating. People fake brilliance in public and hide weakness in private. You hid strength. That realization hit them late, and it hit hard. Because inconsistency is the comfort zone of doubt. When people contradict themselves, others relax. They can explain it away. They can dismiss it. You didn't give them that luxury. You were the same in old stories, quiet rooms, stressful moments, and casual conversations. That kind of reliability is rare, and rare things unsettle average minds. You might wonder why this bothered them so much. Because consistency exposes everyone else's performance. Once you enter the picture, excuses stop working. Suddenly, effort matters, discipline matters, integrity matters, and people who survive on shortcuts feel naked in comparison. Consistency isn't boring, it's threatening. They wanted to believe your image was inflated, but the reality underneath it was heavier, stronger, more impressive than what people even see. That's when they understood they weren't dealing with a persona. They were dealing with a standard. And standards don't argue, they don't explain, they don't defend themselves. They just exist and force everything else to measure up or fall apart. That's why their story collapsed. Not because you said anything, but because your life told the same truth, no matter who was listening. Number 6. Your footprints exposed you before you ever spoke. Image impresses people, impact rewires them. This is where it stopped being debatable. They weren't just hearing descriptions of you anymore. They were hearing outcomes, stories with consequences. People didn't talk about what you said. They talked about what changed after you entered their life. That's when the tone shifted again. Because anyone can look impressive, very few people leave evidence behind. One person said you challenged them without trying, just by existing at your level. Another admitted you raised the standard so high it ruined their comfort. Someone else confessed you still live in their head, not as regret, but as a measuring stick. You weren't remembered for noise. You were remembered for pressure. And pressure always leaves a mark. Imagine this. You walk through wet cement without realizing it. You leave. Time passes. The cement hardens. People come back later and see the footprints and suddenly understand who was there. That's your impact. You didn't announce it. You didn't wait for applause. You moved forward and the ground adjusted after you were gone. They expected stories about your personality. Instead, they got stories about transformation. People spoke about how they worked harder after meeting you, thought sharper, settled less. Some felt inspired, others felt exposed. Both reactions point to the same truth. You moved something in them they couldn't ignore. Extraordinary people aren't remembered for who they were. They're remembered for what they forced others to face. That's what broke the enemy's confidence. Validation can be brushed off as opinion. Impact can't. Impact shows up in behavior changes, life decisions, quiet comparisons people never admit out loud. They heard how you elevated rooms without dominating them, how you challenged people without attacking them, how you haunted certain minds long after the interaction ended. You might wonder why that matters more than praise, because praise fades. Impact sticks. Praise is given. Impact is suffered, processed, and carried. When multiple people describe being changed by the same person in different ways, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. Imagine trying to deny gravity while watching objects hit the ground. That's how their doubt collapsed. They weren't hearing compliments, they were hearing cause and effect. You walked in, something shifted, you left. Nothing went back to normal. Validation flatters the ego. Impact rearranges reality. That's why they couldn't argue anymore. You weren't just consistently yourself. You were consistently consequential. And once that truth lands, resistance looks stupid. That's when they understood it wasn't hype that scared them. It was your effect. Number 7, even the ones who wanted you gone told the truth. When your enemies start sounding honest, the case is finished. This is the point where denial fully collapsed. Friends might exaggerate, allies might protect you, but enemies don't lie in your favor. They have no incentive to. They want flaws. They want openings. They want something they can use. That's why this part hit the hardest. Even the people who disliked you, doubted you, or quietly rooted against you couldn't rewrite reality. They tried, though. You could hear it in their tone, the pause before answering, the careful wording. They wanted to minimize without lying, but every attempt circled back to the same truth. You were disciplined, focused, hard to shake, unmoved by pressure. They didn't praise you, they described you, and description is more dangerous than admiration. Enemies don't crown you, they confirm you. Think about it. If there was dirt, they would have used it. If there was weakness, they would have highlighted it. Instead, they explained why you were difficult to beat, why you didn't fold, why attempts to provoke you failed. In trying to tear you down, they accidentally built the strongest case for why you're untouchable. Imagine a courtroom where the prosecution starts listing reasons the defendant couldn't be broken. That's what this became. Every hater turned into an unwilling character witness. Every betrayal became documentation. They thought they were exposing limits. They were outlining resilience. You might wonder why betrayals didn't damage you, because betrayal only destroys illusions. It can't touch structure, and you weren't built on promises or approval. You were built on habits, discipline, and internal standards. So when people flipped, nothing collapsed. Betrayal hurts performers. It sharpens builders. That's the difference they didn't understand until it was too late. Every attempt to undermine you ended up reinforcing the same narrative. You didn't react emotionally, you didn't spiral, you adjusted and kept moving. That response alone told the story they didn't want told. They walked away from those conversations quieter than before, because now the evidence wasn't just positive. It was hostile and still consistent. And when even opposition can't deny you, the conversation is over. Your enemies didn't mean to testify for you. They just ran out of lies. Number 8. Your silence became the loudest testimony. People who are guilty talk. People who are real let time answer. This is the part they never planned for. They expected reactions, statements, explanations, maybe even a little panic. Something they could twist, screenshot, or replay out of context. But you gave them nothing. No defense, no justifications, no emotional speeches trying to clean your name. And that silence didn't make you look weak. It made you dangerous. Because while they were busy calling, asking, speculating, and fishing for flaws, you were still moving, still building, still operating when no one was watching. You didn't argue with rumors because you were too busy creating receipts. And the universe records action better than words ever could. Imagine someone yelling in a courtroom while the security cameras quietly roll. That's the difference. Noise tries to control perception. Evidence doesn't care. You let your routine speak. Your discipline spoke. Your results spoke. Every quiet decision made when nobody was clapping stacked into something undeniable. They talked, you progressed. That's why the story ended in your favor. You might wonder if staying silent was risky. For most people, it would be. Silence exposes performers. But you weren't performing. You were living in alignment. Silence only hurts people who rely on narrative. You relied on reality. And reality doesn't need defending. While they compared notes, your consistency kept accumulating. While they waited for a response, your absence from the drama told them everything they needed to know. You didn't rush to correct misunderstandings because you understood something they didn't. Time corrects lies automatically. Imagine planting seeds underground. From the surface, it looks like nothing is happening. Meanwhile, roots are locking in, spreading, claiming ground. Then one day, something breaks through, and everyone pretends they saw it coming. That's how your silence worked. Nothing flashy, nothing reactive, just growth doing what growth does. Silence isn't avoidance when your life is the argument. That's why their investigation failed. There was nothing to confront, no weak moment to exploit, no emotional spiral to point at, just forward motion, quiet, relentless, unbothered. And while they thought they were gathering information, history was being written in real time, not in conversations, but in patterns, not in explanations, but in outcomes. The universe doesn't archive words, it archives behavior. They spoke into phones, you spoke through results, and that's why your silence didn't just protect you, it convicted them. Number 9. Once the truth spread, resistance became risky. When reality settles in, neutrality disappears. This is where the shift became visible. Quiet at first, then unmistakable. Once the confirmation moved from private calls to shared understanding, the room changed. People who were sitting on the fence suddenly felt exposed. Staying undecided stopped feeling smart and started feeling late. Silence wasn't neutral anymore. It looked like fear. Doubt didn't sound cautious anymore. It sounded ignorant. Momentum doesn't announce itself. It creeps in through behavior. People started aligning without saying why. Conversations softened around your name. Jokes disappeared. Pushback faded. Not because you demanded loyalty, but because betting against you suddenly felt reckless. When truth reaches critical mass, opposition looks stupid. Imagine this: a crowd watches a tide come in. At first, a few people stay close to the shore, skeptical. Then the water reaches their feet. Suddenly, everyone moves at once. That's what happened here. Once enough confirmations stacked up, hesitation became uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to be the last one doubting what everyone else already accepted. People don't follow belief, they follow inevitability. That's the part most don't understand. You didn't convert anyone, you didn't persuade, you didn't recruit. The investigation did that for you. The same people who tried to question you ended up spreading certainty. Every whisper turned into reinforcement. Every attempt to slow your rise added speed. You might wonder why doubt became embarrassing. Because doubt relies on plausible alternatives. Once those disappear, doubt exposes insecurity. At that point, questioning you wasn't critical thinking, it was denial. And denial never ages well in public. Imagine trying to argue the sun isn't rising while the sky is already bright. That's how resistance looked once momentum kicked in. People stopped debating and started adjusting. Fence-sitters picked sides, not out of loyalty, but out of survival. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side of what's clearly unfolding. The moment you become inevitable, people call it destiny. That's how disciples are made, not through speeches, but through observation. People didn't follow you because you asked them to. They followed because they watched doubt fail repeatedly. Momentum didn't need encouragement. It fed on proof. The irony is brutal. The investigation meant to slow you down, accelerated everything. The doubt meant to weaken you, gave you traction. Once the ripple started, it couldn't be pulled back. Water doesn't apologize for moving forward. And now it's simple. People don't ask if you'll win, they ask how far this goes. Number 10. When facts repeated long enough, they turned legendary. Truth becomes myth when it survives every retelling. This is where confirmation crossed a line. At first, people were just verifying facts, checking details, matching timelines. But facts don't stay flat when they keep repeating without distortion. They start to carry weight. Stories began circulating, not exaggerated, not polished, just told the same way again and again. Pressure you handled without breaking. Situations that would have folded others, but sharpened you instead. Moments where lies were thrown at you and you spotted them instantly, like you'd seen the pattern 100 times before. What shook them wasn't drama. It was endurance. Someone talked about how you performed under stress while everyone else panicked. Another mentioned how you took pain and turned it into precision instead of excuses. Someone else remembered trying to test you, only to realize you were already 10 steps ahead. These weren't heroic speeches, they were calm recollections, and calm stories are the most dangerous ones because they sound true even when they're unbelievable. Anyone can shine once, very few survive consistency. That's the line that haunted them. When they traced your timeline, they didn't find a glow-up moment. No sudden switch, no fake reinvention. Just a long, uninterrupted pattern of the same traits showing up in different seasons. Discipline when it was inconvenient. Focus when no one was watching. Resilience when quitting would have been justified. Imagine reading the same signature across dozens of documents written years apart. Different ink, different paper, same hand. That's what your story looked like when laid out end to end. Not a highlight reel, a track record. You might wonder why this bothered them more than praise ever could. Because praise can be brushed off as opinion. Patterns can't. Once people realized you'd always been this way, the idea that you were a phase collapsed. Phases don't leave decade-long evidence. Legends aren't loud, they're consistent. That's when stories stopped being information and started becoming reference points. People didn't just talk about you, they used you to explain things, to warn others, to measure effort. That's when myth begins, not fantasy, but accumulation. Too many moments pointing the same direction to ignore. They didn't discover something new about you, they finally caught up to what was always there. Number 11. They tried to corner you and ended up building a statue. When someone studies you this hard, it's no longer criticism, it's surrender. This is the punchline they never saw coming. They believed they were gathering evidence, stacking doubts, preparing a case to shrink you down to something manageable. But every move they made exposed the truth they didn't want to face. You weren't the one under examination. They were. Every call wasn't research. It was obsession leaking through the cracks. Think about it. Nobody investigates what feels insignificant. Nobody burns energy trying to disprove something that doesn't threaten their position. The sheer effort alone told the story. The hours spent dialing. The careful wording of questions, the need to hear your name repeated through other people's mouths. That wasn't strategy, that was fixation. Indifference ignores, obsession investigates. They didn't realize it, but with every question they asked, they admitted how much space you occupy in their mind. You became a reference point they couldn't escape. They weren't comparing facts anymore. They were comparing themselves. And that comparison hurt. Imagine someone trying to tear down a building by counting how many people admire it. Every person they ask just confirms the structure stands, taller than expected, stronger than assumed. Before long, the crowd isn't arguing anymore. They're watching. That's what happened. The jury they tried to form dissolved into a choir repeating the same conclusion. They wanted a verdict against you. What they assembled was agreement. You might wonder why this feels so satisfying to witness. Because it wasn't loud revenge. It was self-inflicted exposure. They didn't lose because you attacked. They lost because they couldn't stop watching. The trap they set caught their own reflection. People reveal what threatens them by how much attention they give it. That's the irony that stings the most. You never chased validation, yet they chased confirmation about you. You never announced your importance, yet they treated it like an urgent problem to solve. In trying to shrink you, they magnified you. In trying to question you, they centered you. By the time they realized what they'd done, it was too late. The narrative was already written without them intending it. You weren't accused. You were documented. You weren't defended. You were demonstrated. They didn't outplay you. They played themselves. And now they have to live in a world where that monument stands, quietly reminding them of exactly who you are. Number 12. You did what feuds couldn't. You united them. When people who hate each other agree on one thing, that thing is undeniable. This part still messes with them the most. Not the praise, not the pressure, the unity. People who hadn't shared a sentence in years suddenly shared a conclusion. Old enemies, broken connections, unresolved tension, all brushed aside for one strange moment of agreement. Different histories, different emotions, same respect, and none of it was coordinated. That's how you know it was real. Ex-lovers who never see eye to eye anymore paused and said the same thing about you. Old bosses with competing egos landed on the same assessment. Family members who disagree on everything couldn't deny your trajectory. Even strangers who only crossed your path briefly carried the same impression. No groupthink, no influence, just parallel conclusions forming independently. Agreement without communication is truth. Imagine this. Separate clocks in different cities, all striking the same hour without being synced. That's what this looked like. No one was trying to align. No one was trying to prove anything. Yet the timing matched. The story matched. The respect matched. That's when it stopped being coincidence and started being confirmation. You might wonder why this shook people so deeply, because unity usually requires compromise, but here there was none. People didn't soften their opinions to meet in the middle. They arrived at the same conclusion from opposite directions. That's rare. And rare things disrupt comfortable beliefs. Former enemies found common ground not because they liked each other, but because denying you would have required lying to themselves. And self-respect stopped them. When rivals agree, it's not loyalty, it's inevitability. Common ground forms fastest around what can't be denied. This unity wasn't emotional, it was factual. It didn't sound excited, it sounded settled. And settled truths carry weight. They don't need defending, they don't need amplifying. They simply exist and force everything else to adjust around them. The most unsettling part: you didn't broker this peace. You didn't bring anyone together. Your existence did. Your consistency did. Your impact did. You became the one variable strong enough to override years of division. That's when they understood something important. You weren't just respected in isolation, you were respected across conflict. And when different lives, different loyalties, and different wounds all arrive at the same verdict, the conversation ends. Different lives, same verdict. And suddenly, unity didn't feel unlikely at all. Number 13. The file closed. The truth can't be unseen. Once reality settles in, it never asks permission to stay. This is where it becomes permanent. There's no reset button for what they learned, no mental delete, no way to pretend they didn't hear what they heard or see what they saw. Every confirmation stacked too cleanly, too clearly. Now, every time they see you, they don't see a person anymore. They see the conclusion, the end result of all those questions they asked when they thought you weren't paying attention. They can't unhear the chorus. Your name doesn't land quietly anymore. It echoes, not because people are praising you out loud, but because the verdict follows it into every room. When someone mentions you, there's a pause. A look, a knowing nod. That's recognition settling in, not excitement. Excitement fades, recognition sticks. You don't escape a truth once it finishes forming. What makes this hit harder is how little you changed. You didn't celebrate, you didn't posture, you didn't start explaining yourself now that you were confirmed. You kept moving exactly the same way you always did. Calm, focused, unbothered, because this was never about proving anything. You didn't wait for validation because you weren't built on it. Imagine someone documenting a storm. They don't argue with it. They don't vote on it. They observe it, measure it, and step out of its way. That's what happened here. They thought they were investigating a person. What they ended up recording was a force in motion. Patterns, impact, consistency over time. Things that don't disappear just because someone feels uncomfortable about them. Self-proclaimed fades, confirmed endures. That's the difference they finally understand. You didn't announce yourself. You didn't label yourself. The title came from repetition, not ego. From people who didn't agree on anything else agreeing on you. That kind of acknowledgement doesn't expire. Now when they look at you, there's nothing left to question. The curiosity phase is over. The doubt phase is dead. What remains is adjustment. People recalibrating how they speak, how they act, how they measure themselves around you. Because once a phenomenon is documented, pretending it's ordinary just looks dishonest. They wanted a story they could poke holes in. They ended up with a record they can't erase. The legend isn't loud, it's locked in. And this is where it ends, chosen one. Not with noise, not with celebration, but with certainty. They looked, they tested, they questioned, and they ran out of excuses. You kept moving, you kept building. Now the verdict follows you everywhere you go. If this message hit, press the like button to send it further. And if you're not part of this family yet, press subscribe and lock in. Stay close, stay sharp. This isn't the end of the story. It's the part where everyone finally understands who they're dealing with.